The jeweler called me on a Thursday afternoon, and his voice was careful, the way a man's voice gets careful when he has to tell you something he is not sure he should be telling you. He said, "Mr. Fletcher, this is Sol Bergman, from Bergman and Sons on 3rd Street. I have known you and your late wife for many years, and I need to ask you something, and I hope you will forgive me if it is nothing. A young man came into my shop yesterday to sell a woman's wedding ring, an old ring, engraved on the inside, and the engraving, Mr. Fletcher, was your wife's name. It said, 'To Eleanor, forever, Walter.' And I recognized it, because I am the man who engraved it, 43 years ago, and I could not sell it or buy it without calling you first, because something did not feel right. I was standing in my kitchen when he said that, holding the phone, and I looked out the window at the garden Eleanor had planted, the roses she had tended for 30 years, and I felt the floor tilt under me, because I knew exactly which ring he meant, and I knew exactly where that ring was supposed to be, which was in a small velvet box in the top drawer of my dresser, where it had been since the day I slid it off my wife's finger in the hospital, after she was gone, because I could not bear to bury it, could not bear to put the only thing left of 43 years into the ground. My name is Walter Fletcher. I am 72 years old. I buried my wife Eleanor 14 months before that phone call, and I want to tell you the whole story of what happened after Sol Bergman called me, because it is the hardest thing that has ever happened to me, harder even than losing Eleanor, because losing Eleanor was grief, and grief is clean. Grief is just love with nowhere to go. But what happened with the ring was something else, something with betrayal in it, and betrayal is not clean. Betrayal poisons the grief and makes it something you cannot cry your way through. The young man who sold my wife's wedding ring was my son, Daniel, my only child. I did not know that yet, standing in the kitchen, but I knew it in my body before I knew it in my mind. The way you know a thing is broken before you have finished looking at it, because there were only 2 people alive who had a key to my house, and one of them was me, and the other was my son, who I had given a key to after Eleanor died, so that he could check on me, so that I would not be alone, so that if something happened to me there would be someone who could get in. I gave my son a key to my house, out of love, out of the fear of dying alone, and he used that key to open my dresser drawer and take his dead mother's wedding ring and sell it to a jeweler for cash. Let me tell you about that ring, because you cannot understand what he did until you understand what the ring was. I bought that ring in 1980, when I had almost no money, when I was a young man working at a printing press and saving every dollar I could. And I saved for 8 months to buy Eleanor a ring. And it was not a large diamond. It was a small one, honestly a very small one, because it was all I could afford. And I remember being ashamed of how small it was when I gave it to her. And Eleanor looked at that small diamond, and she cried. And she said it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, and she wore it every day for 43 years, through the raising of our son, through the buying of our house, through every joy and every hardship, and it was never once off her finger, except when she was kneading bread, and even then it went into a little dish by the sink and back on the moment she was done. That ring was not jewelry, that ring was a record of a life. Every scratch on it was a day we had lived, and Eleanor had asked me, near the end, when she knew she was dying, she had held up her hand and looked at that ring, and she had said, "Walter, promise me this goes to Daniel's wife someday. But promise me it stays in the family. It is the only thing I have that is worth passing down, and I want it to keep going. I want some woman I will never meet to wear it in 50 years and know that it meant something." I want you to understand what that promise meant, standing in a hospital room holding the hand of the woman I had loved for 43 years, watching her use some of her last clear strength, not on herself, not on her own fear, but on a ring, on making sure a small circle of gold and a tiny diamond would keep traveling forward into a future she would not see. That was Eleanor. Even dying, she was thinking about continuity, about the family going on, about some woman 50 years from now, feeling the weight of that ring on her finger, and knowing it had been loved. She did not fear death the way most people do, and I think it was because she had built things that would outlast her, and the ring was the smallest and the most personal of those things, the one she could hold in her own hand at the end, and she wanted it to go on, and she made me promise, and I promised, and a promise made to a dying wife is not an ordinary promise. It is a sacred thing. It is a covenant. It is the last contract you will ever sign with the person you loved most, and you do not break it, not for anything, not ever. I promised my dying wife, that our son would give that ring to the woman he loved, that it would stay in the family, that it would keep going. And 14 months later, my son took it out of my dresser and sold it to a jeweler to pay for his honeymoon. I need to tell you about Daniel, because a story like this is worthless if the son is just a villain. And Daniel was not born a villain. He was a good boy, warm, a little weak, a little too eager to be liked, but good. And I loved him without reservation, and I still do, which is the thing that makes all of this so hard. Somewhere between the boy I raised and the man who sold his mother's ring, something went wrong in him, and I have spent a long time trying to understand what, and I think the answer, mostly, is a woman named Ashley, and the answer, mostly, is that my son was weak in exactly the way that a certain kind of person can find and use. Daniel married Ashley 3 months before the ring disappeared. I did not like Ashley, and I tried to. I tried hard, because it is a terrible thing for a father not to like the woman his son loves, and I did not want to be that man, the bitter father who finds fault. But Ashley was, from the first time I met her, a person who calculated. You could see it in her eyes, a constant quiet arithmetic, measuring everything, everyone, for what it could give her. She measured me, the first time we met, and I watched her decide that I was an old man with a paid-off house and some savings, and I watched her file that away, and I watched her be warm to me in exactly the calculated way that a person is warm to an asset they intend to collect someday. Eleanor saw it too, before she died. Eleanor met Ashley only a few times, when the two of them were first dating, and Eleanor said to me, in her plain way, "Walter, that girl is going to spend our son's life teaching him to want things he cannot afford, and he is going to spend his life trying to give them to her, and it is going to cost him everything soft in him, because a man who spends his life chasing a woman's wants loses track of his own soul." Eleanor was rarely wrong about people, and she was not wrong about Ashley, and I watched, over the year that followed Eleanor's death, as my son changed, as he became harder and hungrier and more anxious, as the warm, weak boy I had raised turned into a man who was always slightly desperate, always slightly behind, always reaching for the next thing that would finally make Ashley happy, which was a thing that did not exist, because Ashley was not a woman who could be made happy. She was a woman who could only be temporarily quieted, at greater and greater expense. I watched the change happen in my son over that year. Slowly, the way you watch a season change, no single day different from the last, but the whole thing unmistakable if you step back. When Eleanor was alive, Daniel had been soft, in a good way, generous, easy, a man who laughed readily and did not seem to want much. After he married Ashley, the softness curdled into something anxious. He started talking about money in a way he never had, not about having enough, but about having more, about what other people had, about how they were behind, always needing to catch up to some standard that Ashley held up in front of him, like a moving target. He stopped laughing as easily. He developed that nervous habit with his face, the touching, the rubbing, the tell of a man carrying pressure he could not put down. And he began, more and more, to apologize for Ashley, to explain her, to smooth over the sharp things she said, which is the first job a captured man learns, the management of everyone else's reaction to the person who is capturing him. I tried to talk to him about it, once, gently, about 6 months after Eleanor died. I said, "Daniel, are you happy?" And he looked at me with a kind of panic. And he said, "Of course, Dad. Of course I am happy. Too fast, too bright." And I understood that he was not happy, and that he could not afford to know that he was not happy, because knowing it would require him to do something about it, and he was not able to do anything about it. And so the knowing had to be pushed down, buried, kept out of sight, and a man who is spending all his energy not knowing the truth about his own life is a man with nothing left over, a hollow man, running on fear, and that is what my son had become, in the year after his mother died, and I watched it happen, and I did not know how to stop it. The honeymoon was Ashley's idea, of course. A 2-week trip to expensive places, resorts and islands, the kind of honeymoon that people put on the internet to make other people envious, and it cost far more than Daniel could afford, because Daniel could not afford much, because Daniel worked an ordinary job for ordinary pay, and Ashley wanted an extraordinary life, and the gap between those two things was the hole that my son was always falling into. And so when the honeymoon came due, and the money was not there, my son did the thing that his weakness and Ashley's wanting had been building toward for a year. He used his key. He opened my drawer. He took his mother's ring. I want to tell you how I found out it was him, because I did not want to believe it, and I made myself certain before I let myself believe it, because I am not a man who accuses without proof. After Sol Bergman called me, I hung up the phone, and I went upstairs, and I opened the top drawer of my dresser, and the velvet box was there, exactly where it always was, and for one moment I felt relief, wild relief, because the box was there, and I thought, it is a mistake, it is another ring, Saul is confused. And then I opened the box, and the box was empty, and the relief turned to something cold and sick, because someone had taken the ring and left the box, had taken the time to put the empty box back exactly where it belonged, so that I would not notice, so that the theft would be hidden, and only a person who knew me, who knew where I kept it, who had thought about how to keep me from finding out, would do that. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the empty box, for a long time. I want to tell you what it is to sit on the edge of your bed, holding an empty velvet box that should hold your dead wife's wedding ring. It is a particular kind of silence. The house was quiet, the way it had been quiet for 14 months, the specific quiet of a place where the person who filled it is gone. And into that quiet came this new thing, this violation, the understanding that someone had come into this house, into this room, into this drawer, and taken the one thing that mattered most, and had done it carefully, had put the empty box back so I would not notice, had planned the not noticing, and that the person who had done it was almost certainly the one other person who had a key, the one person I had trusted enough to give a key, my own son. And I sat with that, the empty box in my hands, and I felt the grief for Eleanor rise up again fresh, because losing the ring was losing her again, and mixed into the grief was this new poison, the betrayal, and the two of them together were almost more than I could hold. And then I did the thing I have done my whole life when something is broken, which is that I stopped feeling and I started thinking, because I have learned that feeling and thinking cannot happen at the same time, and that the feeling, however much it wants to, has to wait, because the thinking is what saves you. I thought about who had a key. 2 people, me and Daniel. I thought about who knew where the ring was. I had shown it to Daniel once, after the funeral, had opened the box and shown him his mother's ring, and told him the promise I had made, that it would go to his wife someday, that it would stay in the family. I had shown my son the exact drawer, the exact box, and told him what it meant, and 3 months later it was gone, sold to a jeweler by a young man, during the exact weeks my son needed money for a honeymoon he could not afford. I did not want it to be Daniel. But I am not a man who lies to himself, even when the truth is unbearable. And the truth was that it was Daniel, and I knew it, sitting on the edge of my bed with the empty box in my hands. I called Sol Bergman back. I asked him to describe the young man. And Sol, gently, described my son. The height, the build, the nervous way he had of touching his own face, a way Daniel had done since he was a boy. And I asked Saul if he still had the ring, if he had bought it, and Saul said no, that something had felt wrong to him, that he had told the young man he needed a day to assess it, that he had not bought it, that he had called me instead, and that the ring was sitting in his safe right now, waiting, because he had trusted his gut, 30 years of knowing this family, and his gut had said call Walter first. I want to tell you what Saul Bergman did for me, because in a story full of betrayal, he is the one who was faithful, and he was not even family. He was a jeweler I saw once every few years, and he risked a sale and a very awkward situation to do the right thing by a man he barely knew, because he had engraved a ring 43 years ago, and he remembered, and he could not be part of that ring being lost. There are people like that in the world, quiet, decent people who do the right thing when no one is watching and no one will reward them, and Saul Bergman is one of them, and I will be grateful to him until the day I die. I drove to Saul's shop that afternoon, and he took me into the back, and he opened his safe, and there it was, my wife's ring, in his palm, and I picked it up, and I turned it so I could read the engraving inside, to Eleanor, forever, Walter. And I held that ring in the back room of a jewelry shop, and I wept, an old man weeping over a small diamond, because it was not a small diamond. It was 43 years. It was my whole life. It was the promise I had made to my dying wife, sitting in a jeweler's safe, because my son had tried to sell it. I asked Saul, in that back room, why he had done it, why he had risked the awkwardness, the lost sale, the possibility that he was wrong, and had insulted a customer over nothing. And Saul, an old man himself, older than me, shrugged in the way of a man who has done a great deal of business over a long life, and has learned what matters. He said, Walter, I have engraved rings for people for 50 years, wedding rings, and I have learned that a wedding ring is not a piece of jewelry. It is a story. It is two people and everything that happened between them. And when a young man walks in, wanting to sell an old woman's wedding ring for cash, with the engraving still fresh in my memory because I cut it myself, I do not care about the sale. I care about the story. And something in that story was wrong, and I could not be the man who ended it. He said, if I had bought that ring and melted it down or sold it on, and it turned out I had helped someone rob a grieving man of his wife's memory, I could not have lived with it, and a sale is not worth a thing you cannot live with. And I looked at that old jeweler, and I thought, here is a stranger with more loyalty to my dead wife's ring than my own son had. And it broke something in me, and it also, strangely, mended something, because it reminded me that the world is not only full of Ashleys, that there are Saul Bergmans too, quiet and decent and faithful, and that a man is not a fool to believe in people, he just has to know which people. I bought it back. Of course I bought it back. Saul would not take a profit, would only take what he would have paid, which was fair, and I paid it. And I put my wife's ring in my pocket, and I drove home. And now the ring was safe, and now I had a decision to make. And the decision was the hardest of my life, because the decision was what to do about my son. I did not confront Daniel right away. I want to explain why, because it matters. The easy thing, the thing every part of me wanted to do, was to call my son and scream at him, to tell him what I knew, to let the betrayal out of me before it burned a hole in my chest. But I have learned, over 72 years, that the loud, immediate reaction is almost always the wrong one, that it warns the person before you understand them, that it lets them prepare their defense, and that a decision made in the heat of the first rage is a decision made badly. So I did not call. I held the ring, and I held what I knew, and I waited, and I watched, because I needed to understand something before I acted, and the thing I needed to understand was whether my son was a thief, or a weak man who had done a thief's thing, because those are different, and they call for different responses, and I could not know which I was dealing with until I looked. So I did something strange. I invited Daniel and Ashley to dinner, at my house. I said I wanted to hear all about the honeymoon, which they had just returned from, the honeymoon my wife's ring had paid for. And they came, and I watched them, and I learned everything I needed to know. Ashley talked about the honeymoon for an hour. The resorts, the beaches, the expensive dinners, the whole extravagant 2 weeks. And she showed me photographs on her phone. My son and his new wife in beautiful, expensive places, smiling. And I sat and I looked at those photographs, and I understood that I was looking at what my wife's wedding ring had bought. That the promise Eleanor made me swear, the ring that was supposed to stay in the family for 50 years, had been converted into a week of resorts and beaches and photographs for the internet, and I kept my face still, and I looked at the photographs, and I said how nice, how lovely, and inside me something was turning to stone. And I watched my son, and what I saw in my son was not the face of a man at peace with what he had done. I saw a man who could barely look at me, who flinched when Ashley mentioned money, who drank too much wine too quickly, who had the hollow, anxious look of a man carrying a secret that was eating him alive. And I understood, watching him, that Daniel knew exactly what he had done, that he was not a thief who had made his peace with theft. He was a weak man, being destroyed from the inside by his own guilt. And that told me something important, because a man who feels no guilt is lost, but a man who is being eaten alive by guilt still has a conscience, and a conscience, however buried, is something you can work with. But I also watched Ashley, and what I saw in Ashley was the thing that decided everything, because Ashley felt nothing. Ashley talked about the honeymoon with pure pleasure, with not a flicker of guilt. And at one point, when my son went quiet and stared at his plate, Ashley said lightly, "Oh, Daniel gets moody. Do not mind him. He worries too much about money. I keep telling him, it always works out. It always works out." And I understood, in that sentence, that Ashley knew. That Ashley knew where the money for the honeymoon had come from. That my son had told her, or she had guessed. And either way she knew that her honeymoon had been paid for by selling his dead mother's wedding ring, and she did not care. It always works out. And the working out had been the theft of a family heirloom from a grieving old man. And to Ashley, that was simply how the world provided, and she felt nothing about it at all. I want to describe that dinner more, because it was the most important 2 hours of the whole ordeal. The 2 hours where I learned everything I needed to know, sitting quietly at my own table, watching, the way I have watched people my whole life. Ashley did not know she was being watched, or rather she knew I was looking at her, but she had no idea what I was seeing, because Ashley, like all people who calculate constantly, assumed that everyone else was as blind as she needed them to be. She performed the happy new wife, the grateful daughter-in-law, and the performance was smooth, practiced, and completely hollow, and underneath it, I could see the arithmetic never stopping, the constant measuring of me, of the house, of what might someday be hers. At one point she asked me, lightly, so lightly, whether I had thought about what I would do with the house, now that I was alone in it, whether it was not too much for one old man, and I understood that she was already, 3 months into the marriage, appraising my home, the way she had appraised me the first day we met, and that in her mind, it was only a matter of time before the house, like the ring, became a resource to be converted into the things she wanted. And I watched Daniel watch her ask it, and I watched him flinch, and I watched him say nothing, and I understood that he saw exactly what I saw, that he was not blind to Ashley, that some part of him watched her appraise his father's house with the same sick recognition that I felt, and that he was trapped anyway, trapped by a fear so large it overrode everything he saw and everything he knew, and that the trap was the whole problem, because you cannot reason a man out of a trap he can see perfectly well and still cannot leave. That was the moment I understood the whole shape of it. My son was weak and guilty and being consumed by what he had done, and Ashley was the engine, the one who wanted and felt nothing about the cost. And my son was the instrument she used to get what she wanted, and the ring was just the latest and worst thing that instrument had been used to take. And I understood that if I did nothing, This would not be the last thing. That a man married to a woman like Ashley, a weak man who could be made to sell his own mother's ring, would spend his whole life being used to take things, and would be hollowed out entirely, and would end as nothing, a shell that had given away everything soft in him to feed a woman who could not be fed. And I understood that I had a choice. I could punish my son, expose him, cut him off, let the betrayal end our relationship, and many fathers would have, and it would have been just. Or I could try to save him, which was harder, and less satisfying, and might not even work, but which was the only thing that Eleanor would have wanted, because Eleanor, even from the grave, even after what he had done, would have said, "Walter, that is our son. Save him if you can." So I decided to save him, but saving him meant something specific, something hard. It did not mean forgiving the theft and saying nothing. It meant forcing my son to face what he had done, completely, in the light, and it meant breaking the hold that Ashley had on him, and I understood that I could not do the second thing directly, could not simply tell my son to leave his wife, because a man does not leave his wife because his father tells him to, but I could do the first thing. I could force the reckoning, and I could let the reckoning do the rest, because the truth, once it is fully in the light, does its own work. So a week later, I invited Daniel to my house, alone. I said I had something of his mother's I wanted to give him, and he came, and I sat him down at the kitchen table, the table where Eleanor and I had eaten 10,000 dinners, and I took out the velvet box, and I set it on the table between us, and I opened it, and there was Eleanor's ring, back where it belonged. And I watched my son's face when he saw that ring, and it was the face of a man watching his own grave open up, because he knew that box should be empty. He knew he had left it empty, and here it was, full, the ring back inside it, which meant only one thing, which meant I knew. I did not say anything for a long moment. I let him look at the ring, and then I said quietly, "Sol Bergman called me Daniel. He engraved this ring 43 years ago. He recognized your mother's name. He would not sell it. He called me instead, and I bought it back, and it is home now, where your mother wanted it to stay." And my son put his face in his hands and he wept, and I let him, because some weeping should not be interrupted, only witnessed. And when he was done, he did not make excuses, and that was the thing that told me there was still something in him worth saving. He did not say Ashley made me, though Ashley had. He did not say I was going to buy it back, though maybe he had told himself that. He said, through his hands, "I sold Mom's ring. I sold Mom's ring for a vacation." I am the kind of man who would do that. I do not know how I became that man, Dad, but I did, and I cannot take it back. I let that sit, and then I said the thing I had prepared, the thing that was the whole point. I said, "Daniel, I am not going to yell at you, and I am not going to cut you off, and I am not going to call the police, though what you did was a crime. I am going to tell you the truth instead, because the truth is the only thing that can save you now, and you need saving, son, more than you have ever needed anything. Here is the truth. You did not become this man on your own. You married a woman who wants and will never stop wanting, and who feels nothing about what her wanting costs the people around her. And you are so afraid of her disappointment that you will do anything, sell anything, become anything, to keep her from being disappointed in you, and you have now reached the point where you will sell your own dead mother's wedding ring. And I need you to understand that this is not the bottom. There is no bottom. A man married to a woman like Ashley, a man built like you, will keep falling forever, will keep selling pieces of himself and pieces of his family and pieces of his soul, and there is no amount that will ever be enough, because the hole is not in the bank account, the hole is in her, and it cannot be filled, and you will spend your whole life trying, and you will end with nothing, not even yourself. Daniel was very still, and then he said the thing that broke my heart, because it was so honest and so lost. He said, "I know, Dad. I know all of that. I have known it for a while. And I do not know how to get out, because I love her, or I think I love her, or I am so far in that I cannot tell the difference anymore, and every time I think about leaving, I feel like I am going to die, and so I stay, and I keep falling, and I hate myself, and I keep falling anyway. And there it was, the whole tragedy of my son, laid out on my kitchen table. He knew, he had always known. Knowing was not his problem. His problem was that knowing the truth and being able to act on it are two different things, and the distance between them, for a weak man captured by a strong want, is the longest distance in the world. I did not try to make him leave her that night. I understood that I could not, that it was not a thing that could be done in one conversation, that it was a thing he would have to arrive at himself. But I did one thing. I took the ring out of the box, and I held it up, and I said, "Your mother made me promise this ring would go to your wife someday, would stay in the family, would keep going. I am not giving it to Ashley. I want to be clear about that. This ring will never be on Ashley's finger, because Ashley is not family. Ashley is a woman who let you sell your mother's ring for a vacation, and felt nothing. And your mother did not sweat over this ring for 43 years, for it to end up on the hand of a woman like that. So I am keeping it. And if you ever, someday, become a man who has a wife worth giving it to, a real wife, a woman who would rather die than let you sell it, then it is yours, for her. But not until then. This ring is now the measure of the man you have to become. When you are worth it, you can have it. Until then, it stays with me." And I put the ring back in the box, and I closed it, and I put it in my pocket, and I watched my son understand that I had just given him something harder and more valuable than the ring, which was a reason, a target, a specific man he had to become, and a way to know when he had become him. I want to tell you what happened after, because these stories usually end at the dramatic moment, and real life does not. It took my son 8 months to leave Ashley. I did not push. I just stayed close, called him, had him to dinner, let him talk, and slowly, over those 8 months, I watched him gather the strength to do the thing he already knew he had to do. The leaving was ugly, because a woman like Ashley does not let go of a source of things without a fight. And there was a great deal of money involved, and lawyers, and Ashley took a great deal in the divorce, because Daniel, weak to the end of it, gave her a great deal rather than fight. But he left. He got out. And a man who gets out of a thing like that, even at great cost, even leaving most of his possessions behind, is a man who has done the hardest thing he will ever do. And I was prouder of my son for leaving Ashley than I have ever been of him for anything. I want to tell you about those 8 months, because they were the hardest waiting of my life. Harder than the waiting by Eleanor's hospital bed, because at least that waiting had an end, I understood. With Daniel, I did not know if the waiting would ever end, did not know if my son would find the strength or simply keep falling. And every week I saw him, I looked for the sign, the crack, the moment the truth I had planted finally took root. And for a long time, there was nothing, just my son, getting quieter, sadder, more hollow, and me having to trust that the slow, quiet work was happening underneath where I could not see it. And it was happening. I know that now. Every dinner, every call, every time he sat at my table and looked at the drawer where he knew the ring was waiting, the truth was doing its work, wearing down the fear, one day at a time, the way water wears down stone. And one day, about 8 months after the night I showed him the ring, he came to my house without calling, and he sat down at the kitchen table, and he said, "Dad, I am leaving her. I have seen a lawyer. It is done. I am getting out." And he said it not with triumph, but with the exhausted flatness of a man who has finally set down a weight he carried too long. And I did not celebrate. I just got up and I put the kettle on, because that is what Eleanor would have done. You do not throw a party when a man crawls out of a pit. You make him a cup of tea, and you sit with him while he catches his breath. He is different now. It has been 2 years. He is not a finished man. Courage recovered late is never as sure as courage that was never lost. And there are still moments when I see the old weakness in him, the reflexive wish to please, the fear of another person's displeasure. But he is trying, and he lives within his means now, and he has learned, slowly, painfully, to want the things he can actually afford, to build a life that is real, instead of one that is performed for other people. And he is, I think, becoming the man Eleanor always believed was in there, under the weakness. The ring is still in my dresser, in the velvet box, in the top drawer. Daniel has not earned it back yet. He knows it is there, and he knows what it means, and he knows that someday, if he becomes the man he is trying to become, if he finds a real woman, a woman who would rather die than let him sell it, then it will be his, for her. It is the target he is walking toward. And I think, I hope, that he will get there, and that someday I will take that ring out of the drawer and put it in my son's hand and tell him to give it to a woman worthy of it, and that Eleanor's ring will keep going, into a future she will never see, on the hand of a woman she will never meet, exactly as she wanted, exactly as I promised. So here is what I want to say to you, if you have listened this far, and if any of this sounds like your own family. If someone you love is being slowly hollowed out by a person who only wants and never gives, do not look away. Do not tell yourself it is not your business. Do not wait for them to hit a bottom that does not exist. But also do not think you can save them by force, by lectures, by ultimatums, because a person captured by a want has to free themselves. No one can do it for them. What you can do is tell the truth, completely, in the light, one time, clearly, and then stay close, and wait, and be there when they finally find the strength to save themselves. And here is the other thing I learned, the harder thing. When you save a person this way, by telling the truth and waiting, you have to be willing to lose them. You have to be willing to accept that you have told the truth, and planted it, and stayed close, and it still might not be enough, that your son might keep falling anyway, that the strength might never come. I had to make my peace with that possibility, in those 8 months, had to accept that I had done the only thing I could do, and that the rest was not in my hands, that I could not force my son to save himself no matter how much I loved him, and that acceptance, strangely, was part of what let it work, because a father who is desperate, who pushes, who makes his love conditional on the son changing, only tightens the trap, only adds one more person the son is failing. A father who says the truth once, and then simply loves, without condition, without pushing, gives the son the one thing he needs, which is a safe place to stand while he finds his own strength. The truth does not work fast, but it works. It sits in a person, once you have told it plainly, and it does its slow, quiet work. And one day, months later, it gives them the strength to do the thing they always knew they had to do. My son sold his dead mother's wedding ring to pay for a honeymoon, and a jeweler I barely knew trusted his gut and called me instead of buying it. And because of that one decent man, that ring is home, in a drawer, waiting for my son to become worth it. I lost a great deal in all of this. But I did not lose my son, and I did not lose Eleanor's ring, and I did not lose the promise I made to my dying wife, and in the end, those are the only things I was not willing to lose. Eleanor made me promise the ring would stay in the family, would keep going. It is still going. It is just waiting, in a drawer, for the family to be worth it again. And my son is walking toward it, one honest day at a time, and I believe he will get there. Eleanor believed it too. I can feel her believing it. Every time I open that drawer, she was almost never wrong about people, and she never once, not for a single day of 43 years, stopped believing in our son. Neither will I.